Curious Lloyd.
Sometimes, you can't even bat an eye at those annoying paper and news headlines. It mainly consists of deliberate misinformation or hoaxes spread via the traditional print, broadcasting news media, or via internet-based social media. So if there were to be a headline like Emma Watson set a homeless guy on fire, then they'd have your attention. But thankfully, I made up the previous example, but the rest of these are absolutely true. AC/DC drummer Phil Rudd put a hit out on his former personal assistant. Phil Rudd was the drummer for AC/DC from 1975 to 1983, when he left the band due to drug and alcohol abuse, which you'd think would be compulsory for AC/DC. He then joined the band again from 1994 to 2015. He then started getting into meth. In 2014, Rudd released a solo album, tastily titled Head Job, but it didn't perform so well. Rudd also did not perform so well when he heard of the album's commercial failure. First, he fired his entire staff for incompetence, because he knew the quality of his music couldn't possibly be the issue. But for reasons unknown, or at least not revealed to the media, Rudd had a particular vendetta against one former unnamed personal assistant. Not content with merely giving passive-aggressive references, Rudd called another former associate of his and demanded that the PA to be taken out. The associate thought Rudd was blowing off steam, until Rudd followed up and offered him a choice between $200,000, a car, a motorcycle, or a house if he got the job done. Rudd also opposed another conventional rule for murder for hire by repeatedly calling his victim to tell him that he was coming to kill him. For some reason, the guy eventually stopped picking up the phone. When police finally came to arrest Rudd for the torrent of death threats, they also found a motherload of meth and other drugs hidden around his home. However, Rudd is still a wealthy musician, which means he was only sentenced to 8 months home detention. Having completed his sentence, Rudd now regularly sees a psychiatrist and has quit all the crazy shit. He will tour in Europe in the spring of 2017. Norman Mailer tried to murder his wife in public. Norman Mailer was one of the world's preeminent journalists, the winner of 2 Puzzlers and the co-founder of New Journalism. He is a giant in the 20th century literary canon. He also tried to stab his wife to death in full view of dozens of horrified witnesses. Now you see, Mailer had a slight problem with alcohol. On the 19th of November 1960, Mailer threw a party to announce that he was running for mayor of New York City. In an attempt to set up a dialogue between the rich and the poor, he invited all of the city's most elite citizens, as well as a whole bunch of homeless people. He got a bit upset when, for some reason, most of the rich people cancelled, but as the night wore on, Mailer started getting mean drunk, but eventually, his mortified wife Adele stepped in to subdue him, and this escalated into a full-scale screaming match, which ended when Mailer pulled out a 2.5-inch penknife and stabbed her several times in the chest. Adele survived. She told the doctors that she'd fallen on some glass and stayed with Mailer for another 2 years. J. Robert Oppenheimer was a murderous lunatic well before he worked on the A-bomb. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, may have been responsible for some violence, but Oppenheimer is remembered as that guy who regretted his role in the Manhattan Project, so much so that he spent the rest of his life trying to stop people from doing it again. You probably think of him as a gentle pacifist who sold his soul to science and then tried to buy it again with good deeds. But actually, Oppenheimer was kind of a violent, unhinged manic, at least in his youth, before he settled down for a respectable career building weapons of mass destruction. In 1925, while aboard on a train travelling to Cambridge, he tried to make a move on a woman who rejected his advances. According to a close friend of Oppenheimer's, Francis Ferguson, he later spotted the woman standing underneath the staircase he was standing on, and he tried to drop the suitcase on her head. But later, as a grad student, Oppenheimer had an opportunity to work for future Nobel Prize-winning physicist Patrick Blackett. However, Oppenheimer's strength was in theoretical physics, and he struggled with the hands-on laboratory work Blackett required. But once again, he had a coping mechanism for this stress. He injected an apple with toxic chemicals from his lab and left it on Blackett's desk. Thankfully, Blackett didn't eat it, and Oppenheimer was only given prohibition and sent to a psychiatrist. But even treatment didn't do much good, because when Ferguson later paid a visit, Oppenheimer leapt on his friend's back and tried to strangle him to death for no apparent reason. Harry Potter actor Jamie Waylett wasn't in the last two movies because he was in prison for rioting and looting. Jamie Waylett is better known as Vincent Crabbe, the dumb bully stereotype who serves as Draco Malfoy's sidekick in Harry Potter movies. Crabbe didn't appear in the last two films, though, and for a good reason. Waylett had been sacked. In 2011, protests over a suspicious London police shooting boiled over into violence, and after the ensuing riots, authorities poured through massive amounts of CCTV footage to find the people responsible. That's when they saw this. That's Waylett carrying a Molotov cocktail. After being arrested and charged, Waylett argued that he had no intention of throwing the firebomb. He just liked holding it, and it felt good in his hand. Even if they bought that, the court also saw evidence that Waylett had participated in the looting of a nearby alcohol store. He was then sentenced to 2 years in prison. In a later interview, Tom Felton, who played Draco Malfoy, commented, "He let himself down hugely really, and it's a disappointment for him and the franchise." Isaac Newton oversaw dozens of executions. Sir Isaac Newton was the father of modern physics and is still synonymous with both that field and science in general. But science was only his secondary passion. His first was ensuring the security of England's currency, and he was deadly serious about it, literally. After completing all of his most important work on math and physics, Newton suffered a nervous breakdown and decided to quit science for good. He took up a new career with the British Mint, rising through the ranks until he wound up running the whole show for at least 30 years of his life. By the time he got the job, England was going through a counterfeiting crisis, and Newton was precisely the hard man to fix it. But for one thing, he reinstituted the death penalty for counterfeiting. But this was the 1600s, so the death penalty often meant drawing and quartering. In his time as Master of the Mint, Newton completely revised and standardised the British currency and modernised the minting process. He personally oversaw the brutal execution of dozens of counterfeiters. He even took a role in investigating potential leads, occasionally mingling with the rabble in local bars and taverns in order to suss out information. In short, Isaac Newton was basically a 17th century Eliot Ness.